Hello, class, and welcome to this video. This is week 4, part 2, where we're going to look at the competitor and industry analysis. You need to watch this video if you were not in class for this lecture. And if you were not in class, besides watching the video, you also need to send me a 1-paragraph summary of what you learned from this video, maybe what sticks out to you the most, through the messages function in Halo. All right, so let's get started. Industry environment analysis. We might start by asking, what is an industry? An industry is a group of firms producing products that are close substitutes. In the course of competition, these firms influence one another. Typically, companies use a rich mix of different competitive strategies to pursue above-average returns when competing in a particular industry. An industry's structural characteristics influence a firm's choice of strategies. Compared with the general environment, the industry environment, measured primarily in the form of its characteristics, has a more direct effect on the competitive actions and responses a firm takes to succeed. To study an industry, the firm examines 5 forces that affect the ability of all firms to operate profitably within a given industry. To study the industry, we have to look at the 5 forces of competition. And these 5 forces are the threat of new entrants, power of suppliers, power of buyers, threat of substitute products, and intensity of rivalry among competitors. Identifying new entrants is important because they can threaten the market share of existing competitors. One reason new entrants pose such a threat is that they bring additional production capacity. Unless the demand for a good or service is increasing, additional capacity holds consumers' costs down, resulting in less revenue and lower returns for competing firms. Often, new entrants have a keen interest in gaining a large market share. As a result, new competitors may force existing firms to be more efficient and to learn how to compete in new dimensions, such as using an internet-based distribution channel. The likelihood that firms will enter an industry is a function of 2 factors: barriers to entry and the retaliation expected from current industry participants. Entry barriers make it difficult for new firms to enter an industry and often place them at a competitive disadvantage, even when they are able to enter. High entry barriers tend to increase the returns for existing firms in the industry and may allow some firms to dominate the industry. So firms competing successfully in an industry want to maintain high entry barriers in order to discourage potential competitors from deciding to enter the industry. Firms competing in an industry, and especially those earning above average returns, try to develop entry barriers to thwart potential competitors. In general, more is known about entry barriers with respect to how they're developed, as well as paths firms can pursue to overcome them in industrialized countries, such as those in North America and Western Europe. In contrast, relatively little is known about barriers to entry in the rapidly emerging markets, such as those in China. However, recent research suggests that Chinese executives perceive that advertising effects are the most significant of 7 barriers to China, while capital requirements are viewed as the least important. There are different kinds of barriers to entering a market to consider when examining an industry environment. Companies competing with a particular industry study these barriers to determine the degree to which their competitive position reduces the likelihood of new competitors being able to enter the industry to compete against them. Firms considering entering an industry study entry barriers to determine the likelihood of being able to identify an attractive competitive position within that industry. Barriers to entry include economies of scale, product differentiation, capital requirements, switching costs, access to distribution channels, cost disadvantages independent of scale, and government policy. Economies of scale are derived from incremental efficiency improvements through experience as a firm grows larger. So the cost of producing each unit declines as the quantity of a product produced during a given period increases. A new entrant is unlikely to quickly generate this level of demand for its product that in turn would allow it to develop economies of scale. Product differentiation means that over time, customers may come to believe that a firm's product is unique. This belief can result from the firm's service to the customer, affecting advertising campaigns, or just being the first to market a good or a service. Greater levels of perceived product uniqueness create customers who consistently purchase a firm's products. To combat this perception of uniqueness, new entrants frequently offer products at lower prices. However, this decision can result in lower profits or even losses. Next, we have capital requirements. So competing in a new industry requires a firm to have resources to invest. In addition to physical facilities, capital is needed for inventories, marketing activities, and other critical business functions. Even when a new industry is attractive, the capital required for successful market entry might not be available to pursue the market opportunity. For example, defense industries are difficult to enter because of the substantial resource investments required to be competitive. In addition, because of the high knowledge requirements of the defense industry, a firm might acquire an existing company as a means of entering this industry, but it must have access to the capital necessary to do this. Switching costs are the one-time cost customers incur when they buy from a different supplier. The cost of buying new ancillary equipment and of retaining employees, and even the psychological costs of ending a relationship may be incurred in switching to a new supplier. In some cases, switching costs are low, such as when the consumer switches to a different brand of soft drink. Switching costs can vary as a function of time, as shown by the fact that in terms of credit hours towards graduation, the cost to a student to transfer from one university to another as a freshman is much lower than when a student is entering the senior year. Access to distribution channels means that over time, industry participants commonly learn how to effectively distribute their products. After building a relationship with its distributors, a firm will nurture it and create switching costs for their distributors. Access to distribution channels can be a strong entry barrier for new entrants, particularly in consumer non-durable good industries like grocery stores where shelf space is limited, and in international markets. New entrants have to persuade distributors to carry their products, either in addition to or in place of those currently distributed. Price breaks and cooperative advertising allowances may be used for this purpose. However, those practices reduce the new entrant's profit potential. Interestingly, access to distribution is less of a barrier for products that can be sold on the internet. Cost disadvantages independent of scale. So sometimes established competitors have cost advantages that new entrants cannot duplicate. Proprietary product technology, favorable access to raw materials, desirable locations, and government subsidies are all examples. Successful competition requires new entrants to reduce the strategic relevance of these factors. For example, delivering purchases directly to the buyer can counter the advantage of a desirable location. New food establishments in an undesirable location often follow this practice. Zara is owned by Inditex, the largest fashion clothing retailer in the world. From the time of its launching, Spanish clothing company Zara relied on classy, well-tailored, and relatively inexpensive items that were produced and sold by adhering to ethical practices to successfully enter the highly competitive global clothing market and overcome that market's entry barriers. And finally, we have government policy. Through their decisions about issues such as the granting of licenses and permits, governments can also control entry into an industry. Liquor retailing, radio and TV broadcasting, banking, and trucking are examples of industries in which government decisions and actions affect entry possibilities. Also, governments often restrict entry into some industries because of the need to provide quality service or the desire to protect jobs. Alternatively, deregulating industries such as the airline and utilities industries in the United States generally results in additional firms choosing to enter and compete within an industry, which is always good news for the consumer. It's not uncommon for governments to attempt to regulate the entry of foreign firms, especially in industries considered critical to the country's economy or important markets within it. Next, we have expected retaliation. Companies seeking to enter an industry also anticipate the reactions of firms in that industry. An expectation of swift and vigorous competitive responses reduces the likelihood of entry. Vigorous retaliation can be expected when an existing firm has a major stake in the industry. For example, it has fixed assets with few, if any, alternative uses, when it has substantial resources, and when industry growth is slow or constrained. For example, any firm attempting to enter the airline industry can expect significant retaliation from existing competitors due to overcapacity. Locating market niches not being served by incumbents allows the new entrant to avoid entry barriers. Small entrepreneurial firms are generally best suited for identifying and serving neglected market segments. When Honda first entered the US motorcycle market, it concentrated on small engine motorcycles, a market that firms such as Harley-Davidson ignored. By targeting this neglected niche, Honda initially avoided a significant amount of head-to-head competition with well-established competitors. After consolidating its position, Honda used its strength to attack rivals by introducing larger motorcycles and competing in the broader market. Bargaining power of buyers. Increasing prices and reducing the quality of their products are potential means suppliers use to exert power over firms competing within an industry. If a firm is unable to recover cost increases by its suppliers through its own pricing structure, its profitability is reduced by its suppliers' action. Supplier group is powerful when it is dominated by a few large companies and is more concentrated than the industry to which it sells. Satisfactory substitute products are not available to industry firms. Industry firms are not a significant customer for the supplier group. Suppliers' goods are critical to buyers' marketplace successes. When the effectiveness of suppliers' products has created high switching costs for industry firms, or it possesses a credible threat to integrate forward into the buyer's industry. Credibility is enhanced when the supplier have substantial resources and provide a highly differentiated product. Some buyers attempt to manage or reduce supplier's buyer by developing a long-term relationship with them. Although long-term arrangements reduce buyer power, they also increase the supplier's incentive to be helpful and cooperative in appreciation of the longer-term relationship, which means guaranteed sales. This is especially true when the partners develop trust in one another. The airline industry is one in which suppliers' bargaining power is changing. Though the number of suppliers is low, the demand for major aircraft is also relatively low. Boeing and Airbus aggressively compete for orders of major aircraft, creating more power for buyers in the process. When a large airline signals that it might place a significant order for a wide-body airliner that either Airbus or Boeing might produce, both companies are likely to battle for the business and include financing arrangements, highlighting the buyer's power in the potential transaction. And with China's expected entry into the large commercial airliner industry, buyer power is likely to increase in the future. Next, we have the bargaining power of buyers. This is when firms seek to maximize the return on their investment capital. Buyers, customers of an industry or a firm, want to buy products at the lowest possible price, the point at which the industry earns the lowest acceptable rate of return on its invested capital. To reduce their costs, buyers bargain for higher quality, greater levels of service, and lower prices. These outcomes are achieved by encouraging competitive battles among the industry's firms. Customers or buyer groups are powerful when they purchase a large portion of an industry's total output. The sales of the product being purchased account for a significant portion of the seller's annual revenues. They could switch to another product at little, if any, cost, or the industry products are undifferentiated or standardized, and the buyers pose a credible threat if they were to integrate backwards into the seller's industry. Consumers armed with greater amounts of information about the manufacturer's costs and the power of the internet as a shopping and distribution alternative have increased bargaining power in many industries. Substitute products are goods or services from outside a given industry that perform similar or the same functions as a product that the industry produces. For example, as a sugar substitute, NutraSweet and other sugar substitutes places an upper limit on sugar manufacturers' prices. NutraSweet and sugar perform the same function, though with different characteristics. Other product substitutes include email and fax machines instead of overnight deliveries, plastic containers rather than glass jars, and tea instead of coffee, although fax machines are quickly fading from existence. Newspaper firms have experienced significant circulation declines over the past 15 years. The declines are a result of the ready availability of substitute outlets for news, including internet sources, cable TV news channels, along with email and cell phone alerts. Satellite TV and cable and telecommunication companies provide substitute services for basic media services such as television, internet, and phone. Tablets such as the iPad are reducing the number of PCs sold, and suggested by the fact that the worldwide shipment of PCs has been declining each year since 2010. In general, product substitutes present a strong threat to a firm when customers face few, if any, switching costs, and when the substitute product's price is lower or its quality and performance capabilities are equal to or greater than those of the competing product. Differentiating a product along dimensions that are valuable to customers, such as quality, service after the sale, and location, can reduce a substitute's attractiveness. As in industries, firms are mutually dependent. Actions taken by one company usually invite responses. Competitive rivalry intensifies when a firm is challenged by a competitor's actions or when a company recognizes an opportunity to improve its market position. Firms within industries are rarely homogeneous. They differ in resources and capabilities and seek to differentiate themselves from competitors. Typically, firms seek to differentiate their products from competitors' offerings in ways that customers value and in which the firms have a competitive advantage. Common dimensions on which rivalry is based include price, service after the sale, and innovation. More recently, firms have begun to act quickly, speed a new product to the market in order to gain a competitive advantage. Firms making PCs try to differentiate their products in order to gain a competitive advantage. For example, Apple visually shows and verbally explains the differences between its Mac and the typical PC. Intense rivalries are common in industries with many companies. With multiple competitors, it is common for a few firms to believe they can act without eliciting a response. However, evidence suggests that other firms generally are aware of competitors' actions, often choosing to respond to them. At the other extreme, industries with only a few firms of equivalent size and power also tend to have strong rivalries. The large and often similar sized resource bases of these firms permit vigorous actions and responses. The competitive battles between Airbus and Boeing and between Coca-Cola and PepsiCo exemplify intense rivalry between relatively equal competitors. When a market is growing, firms try to effectively use resources to serve an expanding customer base. Markets increasing in size reduce the pressure to take customers from competitors. However, rivalry in no growth or slow growth markets becomes more intense as firms battle to increase their market shares by attracting competitors' customers. Certainly, this has been the case in the fast food industry. When fixed costs account for a large part of total costs, companies try to maximize the use of their productive capacity. Doing so allows the firm to spread costs around a larger volume of output. But when many firms attempt to maximize their productive capacity, excess capacity is created on an industry-wide basis. To then reduce inventories, individual companies typically cut the price of their product and offer rebates and other special discounts to customers. Then we come to the lack of differentiation or low switching costs. When buyers find a differentiated product that satisfies their needs, they frequently purchase the product loyally over time. Industries with many companies that have successfully differentiated their products have less rivalry, resulting in lower competition for individual firms. Firms that develop and sustain a differentiated product that cannot be easily imitated by competitors often earn higher returns. High strategic stakes. Competitive rivalry is likely to be high when it's important for several of the competitors to perform well in the market. Competing in diverse businesses such as semiconductors, petrochemicals, fashion, medicine, and skyscraper and plant construction, among others. Samsung is a formidable foe for Apple in the global smartphone market. Samsung has committed a significant amount of resources to develop innovative products as the foundation for its efforts to try to outperform Apple in selling this particular product. A few years ago, Samsung held a sizable lead in the market share, 33% to 18%. But in the fourth quarter of 2014, the two firms' market share was virtually equal. High exit barriers. Sometimes companies continue competing in an industry even though the returns on their invested capital are low or even negative. Firms making this choice likely face high exit barriers, which include economic, strategic, and emotional factors, causing them to remain in the industry when the profitability of doing so is questionable. Common exit barriers that firms face include specialized assets or assets with values linked to a particular business or location, like the airplane industry, fixed costs of exit, such as labor agreements, strategic interrelationships, which are relationships of mutual dependence, such as those between one business and other parts of a company's operations, including shared facilities and access to financial markets. There can be emotional barriers, aversion to economically justified business decision because of fear for one's own career, loyalty, employees, and so forth. And government and social restrictions, often based on government concerns for job losses and regional economic effects. This is more common outside the United States. Now let's shift gears a little bit and let's talk about interpreting industry analyses. Effective industry analysis are products of careful study and interpretation of data and information from multiple sources. A wealth of industry-specific data is available for firms to analyze for the purpose of better understanding an industry's competitive realities. Because of globalization, international markets and rivalries must be included in the firm's analysis. And because of the development of global markets, a country's borders no longer restrict industry structures. In fact, in general, entering international markets enhances the chances of success for new ventures, as well as more established firms. Analysis of the 5 forces within a given industry allow the firm to determine the industry's attractiveness in terms of the potential to earn average or above average returns. In general, the stronger the competitive forces, the lower the potential for firms to generate profits by implementing their strategies. An unattractive industry has low entry barriers, suppliers and buyers with strong bargaining positions, strong competitive threats from product substitutes, and intense rivalry among competitors. These industry characteristics make it difficult for firms to achieve strategic competitiveness and earn above average returns. Alternatively, an attractive industry has high entry barriers, suppliers and buyers with a little bargaining power, fewer competitive threats from product substitutes, and relatively moderate rivalry. Next, we talk about strategic groups. And your question might be, what are strategic groups? That would be a good question. A set of firms emphasizing similar strategic dimensions and using a similar strategy is called a strategic group. The competition between firms with a strategic group is greater than the competition between a member of a strategic group and companies outside of the strategic group. Intra-strategic group competition is more intense than is inter-strategic group competition. In fact, more heterogeneity is evident in the performance of firms with strategic groups than across groups. The performance leaders within groups are able to follow strategies similar to those of other firms in the group, and yet maintain strategic distinctiveness as a foundation for earning above average returns. The extent of technological leadership, product quality, pricing policies, distribution channels, and customer service are examples of strategic dimensions that firms in a strategic group may treat similarly. So membership in a particular strategic group defines the essential characteristics of the firm's strategy. The notion of strategic groups can be useful for analyzing an industry's competitive structure. Such analysis can be helpful in diagnosing competition, positioning, and the profitability of firms competing within an industry. High mobility barriers, high rivalry, and low resources among the firms within an industry limit the formation of strategic groups. However, after strategic groups are formed, their membership remains relatively stable over time. Using strategic groups to understand an industry's competitive structure requires the firm to plot companies' competitive actions and responses along strategic dimensions such as pricing decisions, product quality, distribution channels, and so forth. This type of analysis shows the firm how certain companies are competing similarly in terms of how they use similar strategic dimensions. Strategic groups have several implications. First, because firms within a group offer similar products to the same customers, the competitive rivalry among them can be intense. The more intense the rivalry, the greater the threat to each firm's profitability. Second, the strengths of the five forces differ across strategic groups. And third, the closer the strategic groups are in terms of their strategies, the greater the likelihood of rivalry between the groups. A great example of a strategic group is the airline industry. Next, let's take a look at competitor analysis. The competitor environment is the final part of the external environment requiring study. Competitor analysis focuses on each company against which the firms compete directly. The Coca-Cola Company and PepsiCo, Home Depot and Lowe's, Carrefour SA and Tesco PLC, and Amazon and Google are examples of competitors that are keenly interested in understanding each other's objectives, strategies, assumptions, and capabilities. Intense rivalry creates a strong need to understand competitors. In a competitor analysis, the firm seeks to understand the following: what drives the competitor, as shown by its future objectives? What the competitor is doing and can do, as revealed by its current strategy? What the competitor believes about the industry, as shown by its assumptions? What the competitor's capabilities are, as shown by its strengths and weaknesses. Knowledge about these four dimensions helps the firm prepare an anticipated response profile for each competitor. The results of an effective competitor analysis help a firm understand, interpret, and predict its competitors' actions and responses. Understanding competitors' actions and responses clearly contributes to the firm's ability to compete successfully within the industry. Research suggests that executives often fail to analyze competitors' possible reactions to competitive actions their own firm takes, placing their firm at a potential competitive disadvantage as a result. Critical to an effective competitor analysis is gathering data and information that can help the firm understand its competitors' intentions and the strategic implications resulting from them. Useful data and information combine to form competitor intelligence, which is the set of data and information the firm gathers to better understand and anticipate competitors' objectives, strategies, assumptions, and capabilities. In competitor analysis, the firm gathers intelligence not only about its competitors, but also regarding public policies in countries around the world. Such intelligence facilitates an understanding of the strategic posture of foreign competitors. Through effective competitive and public policy intelligence, the firm gains the insights needed to make effective strategic decisions regarding how to compete against rivals. Next, let's briefly discuss ethical considerations. Firms must follow relevant laws and regulations, as well as carefully articulated ethical guidelines when gathering competitor intelligence. Industry associations often develop lists of these practices that firms can adopt. Practices considered both legal and ethical include obtaining publicly available information, such as court records, competitors' help wanted advertisements, annual reports, financial reports of publicly held corporations, and uniform commercial code filings. Attending trade fairs and shows to obtain competitor brochures, view their exhibits, and listen to discussions about their products. In contrast, certain practices, including blackmail, trespassing, eavesdropping, and stealing drawings, samples, or documents, are widely viewed as unethical and often are illegal as well. Some competitive intelligence practices may be legal, but a firm must decide whether they are also ethical, given the image it desires as a corporate citizen. Especially with electronic transmissions, the line between legal and ethical practices can be difficult to determine. For example, a firm may develop website addresses that are similar to those of its competitors, and thus occasionally receive email transmissions that were intended for those competitors. The practice is an example of the challenges companies face in deciding how to gather intelligence about competitors while simultaneously determining how to prevent competitors from learning too much about them. To deal with these challenges, firms should establish principles and take actions that are consistent with them. Professional associations are available to firms as sources of information regarding competitive intelligence practices. For example, while pursuing its mission to help firms make better decisions through competitive intelligence, the Strategy and Competitive Intelligence Professionals Association offers codes of professional practice and ethics to firms for their possible use when deciding how to gather competitive intelligence. Often discussions of intelligence gathering techniques can help a firm ensure that employees, customers, suppliers, and even potential competitors understand its convictions to follow ethical practices while gathering intelligence and about its competitors. An appropriate guideline for competitor intelligence practices is to respect the principles of common morality and the right of competitors not to reveal certain information about their products, operations, and intentions. And that concludes this presentation. Again, if you were not in class for this lecture, please, once you watch this video, send me a short paragraph through the messages portal in Halo and explain to me what part of this video was most impactful to your understanding of competitor or industry analysis.